Number 10. Egyptian blue lotus. The sacred flower that became a drug across the painted walls of ancient Egypt, a blue flower keeps returning. It rises from the Nile in scenes of rebirth, rests against the faces of banquet guests, appears in the hands of the dead, and blooms beside images of perfume, pleasure, and eternal life. Modern audiences call it the Egyptian blue lotus, although it was a water lily, Nymphaea caeruleia, whose petals opened in the light and folded again with darkness. To the Egyptians, that rhythm made it a symbol of the sun returning from the underworld. Yet the flower may have offered more than symbolism. Behind its beauty lay a chemistry capable of making sacred imagery feel physically real. In elite banquet scenes, men and women hold the blue water lily close to their faces, while servants pour wine and musicians perform around them. In funerary art, the same flower appears where death, renewal, and desire meet. Its repeated presence has led researchers to ask whether it was also valued for effects on mood and consciousness. If so, the Egyptian experience of the flower was never simply recreational. It belonged to a world where scent, intoxication, erotic vitality, and religious transformation could exist inside the same ritual moment. A beautiful blossom could become a bridge between celebration and the afterlife. Modern analysis has focused on alkaloids associated with the plant, including compounds discussed in relation to nuciferine and apomorphine-like activity. Those names matter because they point toward brain systems involved in dopamine signaling, sedation, and altered behavior. Apomorphine eventually became a precisely formulated medical compound used in modern treatment for Parkinson's disease. But a measured pharmaceutical dose is nothing like a flower prepared in an ancient vessel. In raw plant material, active compounds can shift with growth, preservation, harvest, and preparation. The same flower praised in a tomb painting may have produced mild relaxation in one preparation and nausea, sedation, or disorientation in another. The most haunting possibility is that the Egyptians combined blue lotus with wine. Images of flowers and drinking vessels do not preserve a recipe, but alcohol can extract plant compounds while adding its own intoxicating force. The result would not have been a single drug with a predictable effect, but a layered preparation combining wine with whatever chemistry the flower released. In the glow of oil lamps, surrounded by music, perfume, and religious expectation, even a subtle effect could have been intensified into something experienced as sacred pleasure or renewal. This is where the ancient record becomes frustrating. Egypt preserved the image of blue lotus magnificently, but not the instructions behind it. We can see who held the flower and how deeply it was woven into elite culture and funerary belief. We do not know the quantity placed in wine, how long it was infused, whether other substances were added, or which experiences were sought and which were feared. Paintings preserve meaning far better than dosage. The ceremony survived in color, the pharmacology dissolved into silence. That silence matters because modern products sold under the name Blue Lotus do not automatically recover ancient Egyptian knowledge. Commercial extracts, dried petals, and vaping liquids may vary in identity and concentration, and some may not reliably contain authentic Nymphaea caeruleia at all. Reports of altered mental state connected to modern products reveal the danger of treating a sacred historical symbol as though its effects were fully understood. Without reliable identity and standardization, the name can survive while the substance becomes uncertain. The blue lotus is a perfect opening to the forbidden pharmacy of the ancient world because it appears gentle. It has no monstrous root, no poisonous fangs, no obvious threat. It floats on water, opens toward the sun, and decorates the hands of the dead. Yet even here, in one of antiquity's most beautiful symbols, the line between ritual object and active drug begins to blur. Modern medicine can isolate a compound, measure a dose, and monitor its effects. Ancient Egypt left behind a flower, a cup of wine, and images of people leaning toward an experience we can no longer fully reconstruct. What disappeared was not the blue lotus itself. The flower can still be named, drawn, and sold. What disappeared was the knowledge that gave it context, which preparation soothed, which overwhelmed, and what exactly the Egyptians believed was happening when the Nile's sacred bloom entered the body. On the walls of tombs, the flower still looks peaceful, almost innocent. But beneath those painted petals waits the first warning of this investigation, Some ancient drugs hid their danger behind beauty, and some recipes were lost because the people who understood them never left enough for the future to safely follow. Number 9. Pituri. The Aboriginal desert stimulant traded across Australia long before laboratories separated active compounds from plants. A powerful substance was already moving across the dry interior of Australia. It traveled through exchange routes that crossed enormous stretches of desert, carried in bundles from one community to another, sometimes stored in bags of skin or human hair. The substance was called pituri, and to outsiders, it would eventually appear to be a simple native stimulant. But that description hides the real mystery. Pituri was a system of knowledge built from plants, territory, preparation and trade, where one leaf could sustain a traveler while another, almost identical in name, could become dangerously toxic. The word itself created confusion. Pituri did not refer everywhere to one fixed species or one standardized preparation. In different regions, Aboriginal communities applied the name to different chewing substances, including native tobacco relatives, and, most famously, leaves from Duboisia hopwoodii, a shrub of the arid interior. Among the most prized material was pituri associated with the Mulligan River region, valuable enough to move through long-distance exchange networks. Its reputation suggests that people recognized where the desired form grew, how it should be prepared, and why some sources carried greater value than others. Inside the leaves were alkaloids, especially nicotine and nornicotine, compounds capable of stimulating the nervous system and placing serious strain on the body. But the danger was not simply that the plant contained active chemistry. Its chemistry shifted. Different populations of Duboisia hopwoodii could contain very different proportions of alkaloids, shaped by the plants and the environments in which they grew. One region might produce leaves dominated by nicotine, like stimulation. Another could yield a preparation with far more nornicotine and a more hazardous toxic profile. To someone without local knowledge, the same plant name could conceal two experiences separated by a frightening margin. Preparation made the substance more powerful still. The leaves were chewed with alkaline ash, and that ash was not simply ceremonial decoration. It altered the mixture, increasing the absorption of alkaloids through the tissues of the mouth. Unlike smoke, which delivers a sharp rush through the lungs, a chewed quid held in the cheek could release its effects more gradually and for far longer. A traveler crossing a brutal desert landscape might value that sustained stimulation, but the same method meant the body was steadily absorbing a dose whose strength could not be measured by sight. To the people who traded and used pituri, this uncertainty was not necessarily ignorance. Their system may have depended on exactly the knowledge later observers failed to record: which shrubs came from which places, which ash should be added, how much could be held in the mouth, and who had the experience to handle it. A bundle of leaves was not separated from its origin. Its source was part of its identity, just as its preparation was part of its power. What modern science would call chemotypes may have been remembered through country, trade relationships and practical warning. When colonial recorders encountered pituri, much of that precision was flattened. Different plants and local practices were gathered beneath a single convenient label, as though the desert contained one aboriginal drug with one predictable recipe. The name survived in written reports, but the map of expertise behind it became harder to see. This is one of the quiet ways knowledge disappears, not through the destruction of a plant, but through the replacement of a complex living system with a word outsiders believe they understand. Modern nicotine products reveal how far pharmacology has moved from that world. A patch, gum, or pouch is manufactured to deliver a controlled amount of an identified compound. Its strength can be printed, repeated, and regulated. Pituri could never fit comfortably into that model because its meaning lay in the raw plant, and raw plants do not promise identical chemistry from one landscape to another. A modern regulator would seek to isolate and standardize its active compounds, while rejecting the uncertain mixture that carried them through ancient trade routes. Pituri was not forgotten because it was weak. It was formidable because it drew power from a desert ecology that no label could completely control. Long before modern medicine learned to count milligrams, Aboriginal specialists had recognized a stimulant valuable enough to cross a continent and dangerous enough to demand knowledge of place. What was lost was not merely a chewing leaf. It was the invisible pharmacological map that once told people where power grew, how to awaken it with ash, and how close that power might stand to poison. Number 8. Neolithic opium. The ancient painkiller that learned to kill long before a physician could measure morphine, human communities had already discovered the strange power hidden inside the opium poppy. Papaver somniferum is among the oldest drug plants drawn into human use, appearing in the agricultural worlds of Neolithic Europe, thousands of years before medicine became a written science. Its capsules looked harmless, but when cut they released a milky latex capable of softening pain, inducing sleep, producing euphoria, and, with only a little too much, silencing the body itself. Archaeological evidence places the poppy among early farming communities of the Western Mediterranean and Europe, where seeds and plant remains suggest its use across an immense span of prehistoric time. It may have belonged to daily life in several ways: as a crop, a traded plant, a remedy, and perhaps a ritual substance. Once people discovered what its latex could do, the poppy would have possessed an authority few plants could match. In a world without modern surgery, antiseptics, or dependable pain control, anything that dulled agony could appear almost miraculous. Later, Mesopotamian traditions are often pulled into this story through the famous claim that a Sumerian expression meant joy plant and referred to opium. The connection is memorable, but debated, and the earliest history of the poppy should not rest on one uncertain translation. The safer truth is dark enough. Ancient peoples recognized the value of a plant whose chemistry modern medicine would identify as one of the most effective and dangerous forms of pain relief ever known. The power of opium lies in its alkaloids. Morphine is the most famous, binding to opioid receptors and powerfully reducing pain, while also causing sedation and euphoria. Codeine carries weaker but still genuine effects. The bane later became valuable as a pharmaceutical starting material, though it is not a harmless form of the drug in raw use. Together with other compounds in the latex, these alkaloids made opium not one clean medicine, but a shifting natural mixture. That variation was where ancient medicine became ancient danger. The strength of raw opium could change with the poppy variety, the soil and climate, the maturity of the capsule, the way the latex was collected, and the form in which it was consumed. A preparation that eased pain on one occasion might be far stronger in another batch. Plants applied no measured dose, and the body offered no warning before relief became disaster. Morphine does not simply make pain disappear. In sufficient quantity, it suppresses the brain's drive to breathe. Someone soothed into sleep by opium could slip beyond waking without anyone understanding that the medicine itself had taken their breath away. This was the terrible bargain at the beginning of pain relief. Opium could quiet injuries, illness, and suffering that might otherwise be unbearable, which meant people had every reason to preserve its use. Yet the same preparation could bring dependency, stupor, or fatal overdose. Skilled users may have learned to judge a plant, prepare it cautiously, and recognize some signs of danger, but experience could never make a variable latex fully predictable. The ancient world had discovered a true medicine before it possessed the tools needed to control it. That control began only when chemistry broke the poppy apart. In the early 19th century, Friedrich Sert Arner isolated morphine from opium, making it possible to weigh a specific active compound rather than trust an uncertain raw preparation. Isolation did not make opioids safe. Measured morphine can still kill, and its descendants would produce new histories of addiction and overdose. But it changed the logic of medicine. The power no longer depended entirely on whatever a field, harvest, and method of preparation happened to deliver. Opium is unsettling because it did not disappear with antiquity. Unlike a lost sacred recipe, its legacy remains inside hospitals, pharmacies, and the continuing crisis of opioid harm. The Neolithic communities who first valued the poppy could never have imagined the scientific industries later built from its latex. But they had already encountered the truth modern medicine still struggles with. The same substance that offers mercy can demand a life. Among the ancient drugs in this investigation, opium may not be the most mysterious. It is more disturbing because it is familiar. From prehistoric fields to modern medicine, the poppy survived because its gift was real, and because the danger could never be separated completely from that gift. Long before pharmacology learned to measure its power, humanity had already found a flower capable of making suffering fade, while quietly teaching the body how to stop breathing. Number 7. Theriac. The 64 ingredient antidote no modern regulator would approve in the courts of the ancient world. Poison was not merely a fear whispered through palace corridors. It was a political weapon, an invisible threat that could arrive in wine, food, or a gift offered by someone smiling across a table. Out of that fear grew one of the most ambitious medicines ever devised. Theriac, a compound intended to protect the body against venom, disease, and deliberate poisoning. It was not a single herb or measured extract. It was an entire pharmacological world packed into one jar, built on the belief that enough powerful ingredients might overpower any danger. Behind Theriac stood the legend of Mithridates, vice-king of Pontus, who was said to have protected himself from assassination by taking small amounts of poisons and antidotes over time. Whether every detail is true matters less than the idea it created. Immunity could be engineered through controlled exposure and a sufficiently complex antidote. Roman medicine expanded that idea, and physicians associated with Galen formalized recipes for a compound that became known not only as an antidote, but as a treatment for pain, bites, weakness, and almost anything the body might suffer. The contents of theriac made it famous. Prestigious versions could contain 60 or more ingredients bound with honey into a thick paste. Among them were opium, wine, cinnamon, myrrh, resins, balsams, castoreum derived from beavers, and viper flesh, included under the logic that a creature associated with venom might help answer venom. Some later preparations even drew authority from mumia, material associated with mummified human remains. To ancient buyers, complexity was not suspicious. It suggested that the medicine gathered the powers of the known world into one defense. One ingredient almost certainly produced effects people could feel. Opium, in a world of pain, fever, coughing, and fear. An opium, containing paste, could calm suffering, induce sleep, and create a convincing sense that healing had begun. Aromatics might aid digestion or make the mixture easier to consume, while honey and wine added their own effects. But the greater promise of theriac, that its crowded recipe could defeat poisons, was far harder to prove. A patient who recovered might have benefited from opium rest, the natural course of illness, or the immense expectation attached to a celebrated medicine. By the medieval and early modern periods, Venice transformed theriac into a luxury pharmaceutical industry. Venetian theriac became a prestigious export, and its production could be staged publicly, with ingredients displayed and compounded before witnesses to assure buyers the medicine was genuine. It was quality control theater in a market filled with substitutions and fraud. Yet it also revealed the central problem. Theriac depended not only on chemical effect, but on reputation and belief that a famous city possessed the correct formula. Modern pharmacology would view almost every feature of theriac as a reason to reject it. With dozens of components acting at once, there is no clean way to identify which causes benefit, which creates harm, or which interacts dangerously with another. Ingredients changed across languages and trade routes. Plants could be substituted or harvested at different strengths. Animal materials could decay or carry contamination. The opium content alone could turn one batch into a sedative and another into a dangerous dose. Even a surviving historical jar could not prove that another preparation was chemically the same. This is why theriac marks a dividing line between ancient medicine and modern drug control. Modern regulators require a defined active ingredient, consistent dose, reliable purity, and reproducible evidence of safety. Theriac offered the opposite: too many substances, too many possible interactions, and too much dependence on trade, ceremony, and trust. Antiquity believed complexity was strength. Modern medicine recognizes that uncontrolled complexity can conceal the danger a remedy claims to defeat. Yet theriac endured because it answered a real terror. People lived with pain they could barely treat, illnesses they could not identify, and poisons they could neither detect nor counter once swallowed. A jar promising protection against invisible death carried enormous force, especially when it contained ingredients that genuinely altered the body. What was lost was not one perfect recipe waiting to be revived, but a system of medicine built around a mixture too complicated ever to be understood, as clearly as it was believed. Theriac promised that death could be held back by assembling every powerful substance the ancient world knew. Inside its honeyed darkness lay the warning that defines this investigation: A drug can become legendary not because its power was precise, but because no one could fully tell where the remedy ended and the poison began. Number 6. Mandrake. The anesthetic that put patients near death before the modern operating room. Surgery was not only a battle against injury or disease, it was a battle against the terror of a conscious human body being cut open without reliable relief from pain. A surgeon could work quickly, assistants could restrain the patient, and prayers could be spoken over the bed. But none of this erased what the patient felt. In that desperate world, physicians across Greek, Roman, Arabic, and later European medical traditions turned to a plant surrounded by dread, mandrake, the root that seemed to offer sleep deep enough for the knife. Mandrake was easy to pull into myth. Its thick root, often divided into shapes resembling legs or a crude human body, and over centuries this appearance gave rise to stories that the plant screamed when torn from the earth, killing whoever heard it. Those legends made the root famous, but they concealed a truth more frightening than folklore. Mandrake did not need magic to endanger anyone. It contained chemicals capable of shutting down ordinary awareness, producing sedation, confusion, hallucination, and when the dose crossed an invisible boundary, coma or death. The danger came from tropane alkaloids, especially hyoscyamine, atropine, and scopolamine. These compounds interfere with acetylcholine signaling, a system involved in memory, alertness, heart rate, and temperature regulation. Scopolamine can pass powerfully into the brain, producing drowsiness and amnesia, effects that might appear useful to anyone trying to perform a painful procedure. But the same chemical family can cause a racing heartbeat, burning dry mouth, widened pupils, overheating and delirium, in which the victim no longer knows what is real. A plant that seemed to silence pain could instead trap the patient inside a nightmare while surgery continued. Ancient and medieval medicine experimented with ways to deliver this dangerous sleep. One of the most haunting was the spongia somnifera, the sleep sponge, prepared with narcotic substances and held near the patient's face so compounds might induce unconsciousness. Mandrake could be combined with opium, henbane or belladonna, stacking one unpredictable plant upon another in the hope of producing a deeper stupor. From the surgeon's perspective, the goal was understandable. Any method that prevented screaming, struggling, and unbearable suffering might seem worth the risk. From a modern perspective, the mixture reads like a pharmacological gamble played against a patient's life. The problem was not that mandrake failed to act. The problem was that it acted without reliable control. One root might contain a different concentration of alkaloids from another, depending on the plant, its age, its growing conditions, and the portion used. Preparation added another layer of uncertainty. A dose weak enough to leave someone awake during an operation could be followed by a stronger preparation that plunged the next patient into lethal poisoning. There was no monitor sounding an alarm when the heart accelerated dangerously, no measured infusion that could be adjusted moment by moment, and no secure way to know whether the motionless body on the table was safely asleep or beginning to die. This is what separates mandrake from modern anesthesia. Modern practice depends on known compounds, controlled concentrations, continuous monitoring, airway support, and specialists able to respond when the body fails. Mandrake belonged to an earlier age in which the visible sign of success was often simple stillness. If the patient stopped reacting to pain, the plant seemed to have worked. Only later would anyone discover whether that stillness had been sleep, delirium, collapse, or death. As chemical knowledge advanced, medicine did not preserve raw mandrake as an anesthetic. It moved toward isolated compounds and measurable ways to control pain and consciousness. Yet descendants of the same chemical world remain in clinical use. Atropine and scopolamine still matter in medicine, but they are used as identified molecules in controlled forms, not as a root pulled from the ground and trusted by appearance. Modern pharmacology did not prove mandrake powerless. It confirmed why the whole plant was too dangerous to trust. The stories of the screaming root survived, because mandrake seemed unnatural, a plant shaped like a person that could steal awareness from the living. But the real history is darker than the legend. For generations, people facing surgery may have accepted a drug that brought them close to death, because the alternative was pain beyond endurance. Mandrake offered one of humanity's earliest doors into artificial unconsciousness, But the door had no reliable lock and no guarantee of return. Before anesthesia became a science of keeping patients alive, it was sometimes the art of making them appear dead and hoping they woke when the knife was finished. Number 5. Henbane. The poison behind the berserker legend in the cold landscapes of northern Europe. Few figures are as feared or romanticized as the Norse berserker. Medieval accounts describe warriors who entered battle in terrifying fury, roaring, biting shields, ignoring pain and striking with a violence that seemed to place them outside ordinary human control. Later imagination filled that image with magic or the famous fly agaric mushroom. But another candidate grows quietly in the same historical shadows. Black henbane, a poisonous nightshade capable of turning perception, memory, and restraint against the person who consumes it. Henbane, or Hyoscyamus niger, spread across parts of Europe and Western Asia. Seeds from the plant have appeared in Viking Age archaeological contexts, most notably in a grave at Furkat in Denmark, often associated with a woman who may have held a ritual or specialist role. That discovery does not prove warriors swallowed henbane before battle, and that boundary matters. It shows that this dangerous plant was known within a Norse world where certain people may have understood substances others were not meant to handle. The reason henbane attracts the berserker theory is far darker than a simple stimulant rush. Like mandrake and datura, it contains tropane alkaloids, including hyoscyamine and scopolamine, compounds that disrupt acetylcholine signaling in the brain and body. In sufficient exposure, they can create anticholinergic delirium, dry mouth, dilated pupils, racing heartbeat, fever, agitation, hallucinations, and memory loss. This is not the controlled vision often associated with a psychedelic experience. A delirious person may see threats that are not there, lash out at people who appear transformed, feel detached from pain, and later remember little of what happened. That profile is why some researchers have argued that henbane may fit descriptions of berserker behavior better than fly agaric. A warrior affected by henbane would not become stronger or superhuman. He might become confused, aggressive, disinhibited, and nearly impossible to reason with. Pain could matter less, not because the body had become invulnerable, but because reality itself had become chemically unstable. To witnesses on a battlefield, a person in such a state could appear possessed and immune to fear. The legend of unstoppable fury may have grown around something more dangerous, a poisoned mind unable to recognize its own collapse. Yet even if henbane played a role somewhere in Norse ritual or violence, the method has been lost. The plant's strength is unreliable. Alkaloid content can vary according to the part used, the age of the plant, the environment in which it grew, and the route by which it entered the body. Seeds, leaves, smoke, infused liquids, or topical mixtures would not behave in the same way. A preparation producing agitation in one person could produce seizures, coma, or death in another. Any specialist who once understood how to approach this plant left no surviving instruction capable of turning speculation into a reproducible practice. Henbane also suffered another kind of historical distortion. In later European centuries, nightshade plants became tangled in accounts of witchcraft, magic ointments, and poisoning. Some records may preserve genuine knowledge of botanical effects, while others were filtered through persecution, fear, and forced confession. A plant capable of causing hallucination and amnesia was almost destined to become attached to stories of supernatural flight, possession, and monstrous behavior. The chemistry was real, but the history surrounding it became clouded by the anxieties of those recording it. Modern medicine knows the power hidden in this family of plants, but it does not need henbane leaves or seeds to use it. Identified anticholinergic compounds can be purified, measured, and administered under control. The raw plant offers none of that control. It is not an ancient enhancement waiting to be rediscovered, nor a lost weapon that safely transformed warriors into legends. It is a toxic organism whose possible connection to berserkers remains compelling precisely because its genuine effects were chaotic enough to resemble madness in human form. If henbane stood behind even a fraction of the berserker tradition, the truth would be more disturbing than the myth. The Norse warrior did not need divine rage to become unrecognizable. A poisonous plant could strip away judgment, fracture memory, and turn terror into violence. Somewhere between an excavated seed and a legend of men who fought like animals, lies a missing ritual knowledge we may never recover. What survives is the warning. Some ancient drugs did not reveal another world. They destroyed the user's ability to remain inside this one. Number 4. Datura. The ritual plant that erased reality. Some plants alter the senses while leaving a person aware that the world has changed. Datura does something far more dangerous. Under its influence, the mind may no longer recognize that anything is wrong. People can speak to figures who are not there, reach for objects that do not exist, wander through events invented entirely by poisoned perception, and accept every impossible detail as real. Across cultures, this flowering plant became associated with prophecy, ordeal, sorcery, initiation, and sacred danger, because it could remove the boundary separating reality from hallucination. Datura belongs to the nightshade family, alongside other plants feared for their influence on the nervous system. Species such as Datura stramonium, Datura inoxia, and Datura wrightii carry tropane alkaloids, including atropine, hyoscyamine, and scopolamine. These compounds block muscarinic acetylcholine receptors, disrupting systems involved in memory, attention, heart rate, temperature, and ordinary awareness. The result is not a classic psychedelic experience in which a person may understand that strange visions are temporary. Datura is a deliriant. It can create a false world so convincing that the victim does not realize the real one has disappeared. In California, Pinwheel Cave provides unusually vivid archaeological evidence that this plant entered ritual life. Inside the cave, researchers identified chewed quids made from datura associated with chumash use, near rock art interpreted in connection with the flower's unfolding shape. The discovery does not reveal every detail of the ceremony or allow modern observers to recreate its meaning, but it confirms that datura was not merely a plant later attached to legend. People deliberately prepared and consumed it in a setting shaped by community, place, and ritual knowledge. That context may have been the difference between a controlled ordeal and a death sentence. A specialist within a tradition could have understood which plant material to prepare, who was permitted to receive it, and how the person should be watched. Yet even such knowledge would never have made datura safe. Its alkaloid content varies between plants and between seeds, leaves, roots, and flowers. A dose that caused confusion and visions in one circumstance could produce seizures, dangerous overheating, cardiac stress, coma, or death in another. The ceremony might control the setting. It could not make the chemistry promise mercy. The experiences associated with datura are disturbingly ordinary in their impossible detail. People have described holding conversations with figures who vanish, smoking cigarettes that were never in their hands, picking up objects that dissolve into empty air, or completing repetitive tasks in a world no one else can see. Its visions do not necessarily arrive as recognizable dreams. They can appear as normal life, convincing enough that a person trapped inside them cannot protect themselves from the physical poisoning happening at the same time, and the body is being poisoned. The same alkaloids that fracture awareness can drive the heart into a dangerous rhythm, stop normal sweating, raise body temperature, impair urination, trigger agitation or seizures, and leave confusion lingering long after the apparent experience has ended. A person under datura may be too disoriented to seek help or understand why help is needed. In modern emergency medicine, such poisonings are not treated as spiritual awakenings. They are medical crises requiring observation and supportive care, while the toxin continues to move through the body. The historical power of datura came from precisely this terrifying uncertainty. In ritual settings, the loss of self and ordinary reality could be understood as contact with the sacred or passage, through an initiation no unprepared person should face. But when the specialists, rules, and safeguards disappear, only the plant remains, carrying all of its ancient danger and none of the context that once surrounded it. Modern curiosity can inherit the mythology while missing the knowledge that may have warned when not to approach it at all. Datura never needed exaggeration. Its chemistry already contains the darkest promise a ritual drug can offer, not merely to show a vision, but to make a poisoned mind believe the vision is the only world left. It stands near the center of this forbidden pharmacy because it reveals where ancient medicine, ordeal, and terror become indistinguishable. Some substances eased pain, some granted wakefulness. Some were believed to reveal hidden truths. Datura could erase the person capable of deciding whether any of those truths were real. Number 3. Sonoran Desert Toad. The venom modern ceremonies turned into myth in the burning deserts of northern Mexico and the American Southwest. A large toad emerges after seasonal rains into a landscape where survival demands powerful defenses. Known as the Sonoran Desert Toad, Incilius alvarius, it carries swollen glands behind its eyes. When threatened, those glands release a milky secretion. In modern spiritual culture, that substance has been surrounded by language of awakening, healing, and ancient revelation. But the first truth is less romantic. The toad did not evolve its secretion for human consciousness. It evolved a chemical weapon meant to stop predators. The compound that transformed this animal into an object of fascination is 5-MeO-DMT, a tryptamine capable of producing rapid and overwhelming changes in awareness. Reports describe the collapse of ordinary identity, intense fear, loss of motor control, amnesia, and experiences later interpreted as mystical or transcendent. The episode may be brief compared with other psychoactive substances, but its intensity can be enormous. Within minutes, a person may enter a state in which they cannot safely guide their body, communicate clearly, or understand what is happening to them. Yet the secretion is not a purified dose of one desired molecule. It is bufatoxin, a defensive biological mixture containing multiple compounds. Alongside 5-MeO, DMT may be other substances, including bufotenine and cardiotoxic bufadienolides, compounds capable of interfering with the heart. This is why the popular image of licking or casually handling a psychoactive toad is genuinely dangerous. The substance people seek and the toxins that may harm them are delivered together, produced by an animal whose glands offer no label, no purity test, and no consistent measurement from one individual to the next. The ancient history claimed for this practice is also less secure than its modern mythology suggests. Toad imagery and remains appear in archaeological settings in parts of the Americas, and animals with unusual biological properties naturally attracted ritual meaning. But an image of a toad is not proof that people collected, prepared, and consumed this specific secretion for visionary purposes. The evidence for a continuous pre-Columbian tradition centered on the Sonoran Desert toad remains debated. Much of the ceremony associated with it today reflects modern reinvention and the desire to place a powerful chemical experience inside an older sacred story. That distinction does not make the chemistry less real. People may approach the secretion believing they are entering a recovered ancestral ritual when they are facing a variable toxin cocktail without a preserved historical safety system. If ancient specialists ever used this animal in a controlled context, their knowledge of collection, preparation, dose, supervision, and danger has not survived in a form modern users can safely inherit. The reputation remained, dependable instructions vanished, or may never have existed in the form now imagined. Modern pharmacology responds to this problem by separating the molecule from the animal. Synthetic 5-MeO, DMT can be produced without exploiting wild toads and without carrying the unpredictable collection of defensive toxins present in gland secretion. That does not make the isolated compound harmless. Researchers must still confront psychological destabilization and medical risks, but it reveals the logic of modern drug science. When a compound of interest is trapped inside a dangerous and inconsistent biological mixture, the answer is not to romanticize the mixture. It is to remove what cannot be safely controlled. Modern demand has also turned a desert survivor into a target. As interest in toad-derived experiences spread, pressure on wild animals increased through collection and exploitation. A creature that developed poison to defend itself now faces human pursuit, precisely because of that poison. The mythology of communion with nature can produce the opposite result. An animal handled or removed from its habitat, so that people can consume a secretion built to protect it from being touched at all. Among the substances in this investigation, the Sonoran Desert toad is uniquely unsettling because the drug is not harvested from a silent root or flower. It is taken from a living animal, one whose defensive chemistry has been transformed into a modern promise of revelation. The desert gave this toad a weapon. Human beings found one molecule inside that weapon and surrounded it with a sacred narrative the archaeological record cannot fully confirm. What remains after the mythology is stripped away is darker than any legend. A powerful psychoactive effect hidden inside poison, an animal placed at risk by human desire, and a ritual past that may be far less ancient than those selling the experience would like people to believe. Number 2. Kykeon. The secret drink of the Eleusinian mysteries. For nearly 2,000 years, people traveled to Eleusis, a sanctuary outside Athens, to enter one of the most guarded religious experiences of the ancient Mediterranean world, believing that after completing the rites of Demeter and Persephone, they would encounter something so profound that death itself would no longer seem the same. At the center stood a humble drink called kykeon, remembered as barley water and a mint, like herb often identified with pennyroyal. What happened after it was consumed was protected by an oath of secrecy so effective that the ceremony survived for centuries, while its most important truth disappeared. The Eleusinian mysteries were built around the myth of Demeter searching for Persephone, taken into the underworld and returned only for part of each year. Initiates prepared through procession, fasting, purification, and ritual expectation before entering the final sacred space. To later investigators, this created an unavoidable question: was kykeon merely a ceremonial drink taken before an emotionally powerful performance, or did it contain an ingredient capable of forcing the mind into an altered state? The most famous theory points to ergot, a fungus that infects grain, including barley. Ergot contains alkaloids related to lysergic acid, a chemical family that would become famous much later through LSD. If selected or prepared in a specific way, an ergot-affected barley drink might theoretically have carried compounds capable of producing unusual perception and visionary experience. The idea is seductive, because it seems to explain why generations of initiates believed they had encountered divine reality. But the same hypothesis opens a far more dangerous door. Ergot is not a clean source of revelation. Later European history recorded outbreaks of ergotism, feared for convulsions, burning agony, hallucinations, miscarriage, and the blackening death of limbs as blood vessels constricted. A contaminated crop could turn bread into catastrophe. If ergot had any role at Eleusis, the difference between sacred experience and mass poisoning would have depended on a preparation so precise that the absence of a preserved recipe becomes terrifying. Some have proposed that ancient specialists could have separated more water, soluble psychoactive compounds from the most dangerous portions of the fungus through careful processing. Chemically, the possibility has been discussed. Historically, it remains unproven. No surviving vessel from the rites has delivered definitive evidence that ergot was present, and no ancient instruction explains how a safe visionary brew was produced year after year. The theory remains powerful because it fits the mystery, not because the mystery has surrendered its proof. Kykeon also cannot be understood as chemistry alone. The initiates did not drink it casually in daylight and wait for an effect. They arrived after fasting, secrecy, and intense anticipation, surrounded by a mythology of descent, loss, and return from death. Darkness, torchlight, sacred performance, and the presence of others could have intensified any reaction, whether the drink was mildly active, powerfully psychoactive, or simply ritual. In Eleusis, the ceremony was not decoration placed around the substance. It was part of the dose. Even the ingredient identified as pennyroyal adds a warning. In concentrated forms, pennyroyal chemistry can be toxic, reminding us that sacred herbs were not automatically harmless. The ancient world could bring together fasting, medicinal plants, infected grain, and intense psychological framing without the distinctions modern pharmacology demands. To an initiate, the result might have been transformation. To a modern regulator, it would be an unacceptable unknown. The mystery of kykeon endures because Eleusis succeeded in keeping its promise. Those initiated into its secrets did not leave behind the explanation later centuries wanted. When the sanctuary declined and the rites ended, the cup remained in texts while the method behind it vanished. Modern science can isolate lysergic compounds, measure their dose, and identify toxins that accompany them. It cannot honestly recreate the drink that stood before the closed doors of Eleusis. Whatever the initiates experienced, kykeon became one of history's most haunting lost medicines because its power cannot be separated from its silence. Perhaps it was barley water carried into a ritual designed to overwhelm the soul. Perhaps it contained a carefully managed chemical doorway, or perhaps the same cup that promised a glimpse beyond death always stood dangerously close to causing it. At Eleusis, knowledge was protected so completely that the revelation survived only as legend, and the substance that may have produced it vanished behind the oath that made it sacred. Number 1. Soma. The immortality drink, whose ingredient vanished forever among all the substances in the forbidden pharmacy of the ancient world. The final one is the most impossible to hold. There is no confirmed plant sealed in a tomb, no surviving dose in a jar, and no chemical residue that has ended the argument. What survives is a name repeated through some of humanity's oldest sacred poetry, Soma. In the hymns of the Rigveda, Soma is pressed, filtered, offered to the gods, and consumed by those seeking strength, vision, and a taste of immortality. It is described as a plant, a drink, a divine presence, and a source of power so intense that ordinary language seems to bend around it. To the Vedic poets, Soma was not simply intoxication. It carried warriors toward courage, poets toward inspiration, and ritual participants toward communion with the divine. When the verses speak of immortality, they do not necessarily promise that a human body could live forever. They suggest sacred vitality and a temporary crossing beyond ordinary mortality. Whatever Soma did chemically, the people who used it experienced that effect through chanting, sacrifice, and belief. The drug and the god had become impossible to separate. That is what makes its disappearance so haunting. The Rigveda preserves Soma's importance in remarkable detail, yet its original botanical identity is no longer known with certainty. One major candidate is ephedra, a shrub containing stimulant compounds capable of increasing alertness and endurance. Its case is strengthened by the close relationship between Vedic Soma and Iranian Hauma, a related sacred tradition associated in later contexts with ephedra. If this was the answer, Soma may have been a stimulant sacrament, powerful enough to make exhaustion lift and ritual energy feel divine, while also placing strain on the body. Another famous theory identifies Soma with Amanita muscaria, the red and white fly agaric mushroom. This interpretation draws power from the visionary language of the hymns and comparisons with mushroom traditions in northern Eurasia. Under that reading, Soma was a substance capable of producing strange perception and experiences interpreted as divine contact. Yet critics argue that no mushroom theory explains every feature of the ritual, its preparation, or its geography. A theory can capture the imagination while still failing to prove what was poured into the cup. Other candidates deepen the uncertainty. Some scholars have considered Peganum harmala, or Syrian rue, whose compounds can contribute to altered states. Others suspect Soma may not have remained one fixed plant across all times and places. As communities migrated into new landscapes, the original source may have become unavailable. Substitute plants could preserve the ceremony while changing the chemistry. The pressing stones, filtering, offerings, and sacred name may have endured long after the first organism behind the tradition disappeared from reach. This loss is more severe than forgetting a dose. It is the disappearance of the central ingredient itself. Modern pharmacology can isolate morphine from opium, identify the poisons inside mandrake and datura, and study a purified synthetic molecule rather than trust a dangerous animal secretion. With Soma, it cannot even begin honestly, because no one can say with certainty what should be isolated. No researcher can reconstruct the original drink, and no modern claim of recovering Soma can escape the fact that it begins by choosing among competing possibilities rather than proving the lost identity. Soma belongs at the end of this investigation because it reveals the darkest kind of pharmacological disappearance. The other substances show how medicine could stand beside poison, how a healing plant could become lethal when the dose shifted, or how ritual could surround a dangerous chemical with sacred authority. Soma shows that a substance can become so central to religion that its name survives after its physical truth is gone. Once, people gathered something from the living world, crushed it, filtered it, and believed they had brought divine power into a vessel. Now the vessel is empty, and every proposed ingredient creates a different vision of what those ancient participants actually felt. Perhaps Soma sharpened the body like a stimulant, perhaps it opened visions through intoxication, perhaps the ceremony and the chemistry were so tightly joined that neither alone explains the force of the experience. What matters is that the most celebrated sacred drug of the Vedic world vanished without surrendering its identity. Humanity remembers the hymns, the offerings, and the promise of immortality, but not the substance behind them. In that silence lies the final truth of the ancient pharmacopoeia. Some of its most powerful knowledge disappeared before science ever had the chance to discover what was really in the cup.